Hi, this is Mike Billington with the Executive Intelligence Review and the Schiller Institute. I am here today with Colonel Richard Black, Senator Richard Black, who after serving 31 years in the Marines and in the Army, then served in the Virginia House of Delegates from 1998 to 2006, and in the Virginia Senate from 2012 to 2020. I'll allow Colonel Black to describe his military service himself. So, Colonel Black, welcome. With the U.S. and U.K. and NATO surrogate war with Russia, which is taking place in Ukraine, and the economic warfare being carried out directly against Russia, this has been accompanied by an information war, which is intended to demonize Russia and especially President Vladimir Putin. One repeated theme is that the Russian military is carrying out ruthless campaigns of murder against civilians and destruction of residential areas, often referring to the Russian military operations in Syria, claiming that they had done the same thing in Syria, especially against Aleppo. These are supposedly examples of their war crimes and crimes against humanity. You have been a leading spokesman internationally for many years, exposing the lies about what took place in Syria and the war on Syria. So first, let me ask, how and why did Russia get involved in Syria militarily? And how does that contrast with the US and NATO supposed justification for their military intervention in Syria?
Well, let me begin, if I could, by telling our listeners that I'm very patriotic. I volunteered to join the Marines, and I volunteered to go to Vietnam. I fought in the bloodiest Marine campaign of the entire war. I was a helicopter pilot, flew 269 combat missions. So I am very pro-American. I actually was a part of NATO and was prepared to die in Germany to defend against an attack by the Soviet Union. But I do not feel, Russia is not the Soviet Union at all. People don't understand that because the media has not made it clear. But Russia is not a communist state. Soviet Union was a communist state. What I do know, and I can tell you about Aleppo, is that Russia was extremely reluctant to get involved in combat in Syria. The war began in 2011 when the United States landed Central Intelligence operatives to begin coordinating with Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. And we have been unwavering supporters of Al-Qaeda since before the war formally began. We are supporters of Al-Qaeda today, where they're bottled up in Idlib province. The CIA supplied them under secret Operation Timber Sycamore. We gave them all of their anti-tank weapons, all of their anti-air missiles. And Al-Qaeda has always been our proxy force on the ground. They, together with ISIS, have carried out the mission of the United States, together with a great number of affiliates that really are kind of interchangeable. You have the Free Syrian Army. Soldiers move from ISIS to Al-Qaeda to Free Syrian Army rather fluidly. And so we started that war, but the United States has a strategic policy of using proxies to engage in war. And our objective was overthrow the legitimate government of Syria. And in order to do that, we employed proxy soldiers who were the most vile of all terrorists. Something very similar is happening right now in Ukraine, but to blame the Russians for the massive destruction that took place within Aleppo, it's bizarre because they were not there. They were not even present when this happened. So this is simply another part of the propaganda narrative, which has been very effective for the West, demonizing Russia and making claims that have no substance, but people don't remember the history of these things. They're rather complex. So no, Russia was not in any respect responsible for the massive destruction of the city of Aleppo. But it just shows the utter cruelty. When we fight these wars, we have no limits on the cruelty and the inhumanity that we're prepared to impose on the people, making them suffer so that somehow that will translate into overthrowing the government and perhaps taking their oil, taking their resources.
Clearly the policy against Russia today by the current administration.
Yes. You know, Russia is perhaps more blessed with natural resources than any other nation on earth. They are a major producer of grain, of oil, of aluminum, of fertilizers, of an immense number of things that tie into the whole global economy. And no doubt there are people who look at this and say, you know, if we could somehow break up Russia itself, there will be fortunes made to where trillionaires will be made by the dozens. And there's some attraction to that. Certainly, you've seen some of this taking place already with foreign interests taking over Ukraine and taking their vast resources. But we began a drive towards Russia almost immediately after the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. The Soviet Union dissolved, the Warsaw Pact dissolved, and unfortunately, one of the great tragedies of history is that we failed to dissolve NATO. The sole purpose of NATO was to defend against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union no longer existed. NATO went toe-to-toe with the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact was gone. It no longer existed. There was no purpose in NATO continuing to exist. However, we retained it, and it could not exist unless it had an enemy. Russia was desperate to become part of the West. I met with the head of Gazprom, the largest corporation in Russia, and this was shortly after the demise of the Soviet Union. And he described for me how they were struggling to have their media be as free as it was in the West, and they perceived us as being much more free and open than we were. And he said, you know, we've got this problem because we have this uprising in Chechnya, which is part of Russia. And he said, the Chechnyan rebels send videos to Russian television, and we play them on Russian television because that's the way freedom of speech works. And I said, are you kidding me? I said, you're publishing the enemy propaganda films? He said, yeah. He said, isn't that the way you do it in the United States? I said, no. I said, in the Second World War, we took the head of the Associated Press and we put him in charge of wartime censorship. And it was very strict. But this is just an example of how they were struggling. They went from being an officially atheist country to where they became the most Christianized major nation in Europe by far. Not only were the people the most Christianized people in any major country in Europe, but the government itself was very supportive of the church, of the Christian faith. They altered their constitution to say that marriage was the union of one man and one woman. They became very restrictive on the practice of abortion. They ended the practice of overseas adoptions, where some people were going to Russia and adopting little boys for immoral purposes. So they became a totally different culture. And in any event, the United States we have this long-standing strategy, this political military strategy of expanding the empire. We did it in the Middle East, where we attempted to create a massive neo-colonial empire. It became rather frayed. The people did not want it. And it seems to be doomed to extinction sometime, but it may go on for another 100 years. But in any event, we are trying to do something similar as we roll to the east, right up virtually to the Ukrainian border, or to the Russian border, rather.
So the U.S. and U.K. position on the war in Ukraine, just over these last few weeks, has now become not only supporting the war, but victory at all costs. This has been declared by Defense Secretary Austin and others, and they are pumping in huge quantities of not only defensive but offensive military weaponry to the Kiev regime. What do you see as the consequence of this policy?
I think one thing that it will do is it will ensure that a tremendous number of innocent Ukrainian soldiers will die needlessly. A lot of Russian soldiers will die needlessly. These are kids. You know, kids go off to war. I went off to war as a kid. You think your country, right or wrong, everything they're doing is fine. It breaks my heart when I look at the faces of young Russian boys who have been gunned down, in some cases very criminally, by Ukrainian forces. And likewise, I see Ukrainian young men who are being slaughtered on the battlefield. We don't care. The United States and NATO, we do not care how many Ukrainians die. Not civilians, not women, not children, not soldiers. We do not care. It's become a great football game. We've got our team, they've got our team, rah, rah. We want to get the biggest score and run it up. And, we don't care how many of our players get crippled on the playing field, as long as we win. Now, we are shipping fantastic quantities of weapons, and it's caused the stock of Raytheon, which creates missiles, and Northrop Grumman, which creates aircraft and so forth, and missiles. All of these defense industries have become tremendously bloated with tax dollars. I don't think it's ultimately going to change the outcome. I think that Russia will prevail. The Ukrainians are in a very awkward strategic position in the east, but if you look at the way that this unfolded, President Putin made a desperate effort to stop the march towards war. Back in December of 2021, he went so far as to put specific written proposals on the table with NATO, peace proposals to defuse what was coming about. Because at this point, Ukraine was massing troops to attack the Donbass. So he was trying to head this off. He didn't want war. And NATO just blew it off, just dismissed it, never took it seriously, never went into serious negotiations.